The old road leading into the countryside had changed over the years. What was once a quiet stretch of dirt and gravel was now paved smooth with painted lines guiding travelers. New houses stood in the distance, their modern roofs breaking up the view that used to be endless fields. But for one man, the sight of those hills, the smell of grass and the wide skies above stirred memories too deep to be shaken. He was finally coming back to his family ranch. The man had spent years away, working across the country, moving from city to city, never staying long in one place. His work demanded travel, and his life was often filled with meetings, airports, and hotel rooms. It was a life that looked busy from the outside, but inside it left him tired. What he longed for was not the rush of cities, but the calm rhythm of the land. The ranch was the only place that had ever given him peace. When his truck rolled over the small hill and the ranch came into view, his chest filled with both relief and pride. The old red barn still stood strong, though its paint was faded. The wooden fences stretched across green pastures. Horses grazed quietly near the creek, and in the distance, the farmhouse sat with its white porch, just as it had in his childhood. For a moment, he parked his truck on the edge of the driveway and sat still, soaking in the sight. This land had been his grandfather's before it was his father's. Generations had cared for it. Now it was his turn again. The air was different here, cleaner, sharper. It smelled faintly of pine trees mixed with the earthy scent of soil after a recent rain. He stepped out of the truck and felt the gravel crunch beneath his boots. Every step reminded him of the boy he once was, the boy who used to run across these fields chasing after the cattle dogs, the boy who would fall asleep on the porch swing during summer nights listening to crickets sing. He unlocked the farmhouse door, and the hinges creaked, but the sound made him smile. The house was old, but it carried the warmth of family. Dust lay across the wooden floors, but the walls still held framed pictures of his parents and grandparents. It was as if the house had been waiting quietly for his return. He spent the first few days cleaning, repairing, and walking the land. He mended parts of the fence, cleared brush near the barn, and checked on the livestock that had been cared for by a trusted neighbor while he was gone. Every task felt grounding. His hands were sore, his clothes were dirty, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. But while the ranch felt familiar, the neighborhood around it had changed. When he left years ago, the nearest neighbor was miles away. Now new houses sat close by, lined neatly along a road that didn't even exist back then. He saw families walking their dogs, children riding bikes, and cars pulling into driveways of homes that all looked nearly the same. It was a new community, one that had formed while he was away. At first, he thought little of it. After all, growth was natural and people needed homes. But one thing stood out. At the entrance to the new development, he noticed a large signboard. "Welcome to Oakwood Meadows, a homeowners association community." He frowned slightly. And so, here? It seemed strange. His ranch had been here for nearly a century, long before these houses. The idea that anyone from that association would believe they could manage his land almost made him laugh. Still, he didn't think much of it. His property was separate, his deeds were clear, and he had no reason to worry. One evening, as the sun set across the fields, painting the sky in gold and orange, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The crickets began their nightly chorus, and the horses moved slowly toward the barn. The ranch was alive, breathing with a rhythm he had missed for far too long. But just as he leaned back in his chair, enjoying the calm, he noticed a figure walking briskly up the driveway. A woman carrying a clipboard, dressed in neat clothes, her expression sharp and determined. He had not met her before. She didn't wave, didn't smile. Instead, she marched straight up as if she had business to settle. "Hello," he said politely, standing up. The woman didn't return the greeting. Instead, she looked around the property with narrowed eyes as if she were taking notes in her head. Finally, she spoke. "You're the new resident?" He gave a small chuckle. "Not new. This ranch has been mine for a long time. Just been away." She nodded stiffly but didn't soften. "Well, I'm the president of the Oakwood Meadows HOA, and I'll need you to take care of a few issues. First, that barn is in violation of our appearance standards. It'll need a fresh coat of approved paint. And those horses, livestock is restricted in this community. They'll have to go." For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. His barn? His livestock? Restricted? He looked at her with calm eyes. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. This ranch isn't part of your community. She crossed her arms. All properties in this area are under our HOA. Everyone follows the rules. That includes you. The man simply smiled. He could already sense the storm brewing, but inside he felt no fear. He knew his land, his rights, and his history. And while this woman might think she could enforce her rules here, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Still, he didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, he chose patience. I've been here long before your HOA existed. This ranch doesn't fall under your authority, but I appreciate your concern. The woman's face tightened. She clearly wasn't used to being told no. Without another word, she scribbled something on her clipboard, spun on her heel, and walked back down the driveway. The man stood quietly, sipping the last of his coffee as he watched her leave. The crickets sang on, the stars began to rise, and the land remained steady around him. Whatever trouble was coming, he knew the truth, and the truth would be more than enough. That night, as he prepared to sleep, he thought about the days ahead. Life on the ranch was supposed to be peaceful, but with the arrival of this new neighbor and her clipboard full of rules, peace might be tested. What she didn't know, what no one here knew yet, was that he wasn't just another homeowner returning to his land. His work across the country had given him a role few people held. He wasn't just familiar with HOAs, he oversaw them at the highest level. But for now, he said nothing. The land was quiet, the night was long, and tomorrow would bring its own stories. The morning was calm, but the man knew it would not stay that way for long. After the woman's last outburst, her words still echoed in his mind. I'll have no choice but to call the authorities. He wasn't worried. He knew the land, he knew the records, and he knew the truth, but he also understood that people who believed they were right often acted without pausing to check the facts. And this woman, the HOA president, was one of those people. The ranch, however, went on with its natural rhythm. Birds sang as they hopped along the fence posts. The horses grazed near the creek, flicking their tails at flies. The wind carried the faint smell of wildflowers across the fields. It was a place of peace, even if outside forces tried to disturb it. By mid-morning, as the man was cleaning tools in the barn, he heard the distant hum of a car engine. It grew louder, then stopped suddenly at the end of his driveway. He walked out, wiping his hands with a rag. A police cruiser sat there, its lights not flashing, but its presence impossible to miss. Behind it, another car pulled in. The HOA president stepped out, her face set in a look of triumph as if she had already won a battle. The officer got out slowly, adjusting his hat and glancing around the ranch. He was middle-aged, with calm eyes that had seen plenty of disputes before. He carried no aggression, only the steady professionalism of someone doing his duty. "Afternoon, sir," the officer said politely. "We received a call about some complaints." The man nodded. "I expected you might. You're welcome to take a look around." The woman quickly cut in. "Officer, this man is refusing to follow community rules. His barn is painted the wrong color, and he's keeping livestock where it's not allowed. He's breaking HOA regulations, and he's ignoring every notice we've given him. We need him fined and forced into compliance." She spoke with authority, her voice loud and firm, as if sheer volume would prove her point. The officer listened without interruption, then turned to the ranch owner. "And your side of the story, sir?" The man remained calm, his voice even. "This ranch has been in my family for generations. It's not part of Oakwood Meadows. Their HOA has no jurisdiction here. My property deed makes that clear. I respect their rules for their neighborhood, but they don't apply to me." The officer nodded thoughtfully. "Do you have documentation?" "Of course," and the man said. He walked into the farmhouse and returned with a folder of papers, copies of his deed, property maps, and county records. He handed them over, each page neatly organized. The officer studied the documents carefully. The woman shifted impatiently, tapping her foot. "Officer, he's trying to confuse you with old paperwork. All the homes here are under HOA authority." But the officer didn't rush. He compared the documents with the notes on his phone, cross-checking details. Finally, he looked up. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "his land is not part of Oakwood Meadows. The HOA boundary ends before his property line. This ranch is exempt. He's within his rights to maintain his barn and livestock as he chooses." The woman's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing without words. "That can't be right. Everyone has to follow the rules." "That's how it works," the officer shook his head. "Not in this case. His property is separate." I suggest you avoid making further complaints about something outside your jurisdiction." For a moment, silence filled the air. The horses in the pasture lifted their heads as if sensing the tension. The man stood quietly, not triumphant, just steady. He didn't gloat. He didn't rub it in. He simply let the truth speak for itself. The officer handed the documents back. "Sir, thank you for your cooperation. Everything here looks fine. Sorry to trouble you." The man gave a polite nod. "No trouble at all, officer. I appreciate you coming out to check." The officer tipped his hat, got back in his cruiser and drove away, leaving a faint trail of dust on the road. The woman, however, stayed. Her triumph had turned into disbelief. She pointed a finger at the man, her voice trembling with frustration. "This isn't over. You think you can stand above the rules, but you'll see. You'll regret this." The man didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at her with calm eyes. "I don't stand above the rules. I follow the right ones. That's the difference." She glared at him for another long moment before storming back to her car. The door slammed and she drove off quickly, her tires crunching against the gravel. When the sound faded, the ranch fell quiet again. The wind rustled through the trees, the horses lowered their heads back to the grass, and the man returned to his chores as if nothing had happened. But inside, he knew this was not the end. That evening at the small-town grocery store, he noticed more whispers among the new neighbors. Some glanced at him curiously, others with respect, and a few with confusion. Word of the police visit had already begun to spread. Stories always traveled quickly in small communities. One older man approached him by the shelves of canned goods. "Heard the HOA president called the cops on you," the man said with a chuckle. "She's been giving folks trouble since the start." Good to know someone stood their ground. The ranch owner nodded but said little. He wasn't interested in gossip or attention. He simply wanted peace. Over the next 2 days, the HOA president didn't come by the ranch, but he could feel the weight of her anger in the way she drove past without slowing, her eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look at him. She was not the type to give up easily. On the 3rd day, a letter arrived in his mailbox. It was from the HOA, typed neatly on official letterhead. The letter repeated the same demands: repaint the barn, remove the livestock, and comply with community rules. At the bottom, it threatened further legal action if he refused. The man read the letter slowly, then placed it in his folder with the rest of his records. He smiled faintly, not with arrogance but with certainty. She was still trying, still pushing, still convinced she could bend reality to fit her will. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that he was not just another landowner resisting HOA rules. His work across the country had given him a role that placed him above these small disputes. He was a national overseer of HOA policies, someone who advised and guided associations across the United States. For now, he kept that truth quiet. There was no need to reveal it yet. Let her push. Let her try. When the time came, the truth would come out. And when it did, it would change everything. That night, as he stood on the porch watching the stars spread across the sky, he thought of his grandfather. The old man had often said, "Land remembers. It doesn't bow to every passing storm. It stays and it waits and it proves stronger than all who try to claim it." The man smiled at the memory. The land was steady and so was he. The storm might not be over, but the foundation beneath him was too deep to be shaken, and he knew. The next chapter in this struggle was coming soon. The next morning began quietly on the ranch. A soft mist clung to the fields and the horses grazed with their heads bowed low. The man rose early, just as he always did when he was young, and walked the land with his boots still wet from dew. He checked the fence line, fixed a loose post near the creek, and took his time brushing down the horses. The rhythm of the ranch was calm, steady, and healing. But while he felt peace, he knew yesterday's visit had left a shadow over the air. The woman with the clipboard, sharp, determined, and unkind, had not come by just for a friendly chat. She carried herself like someone who believed she had authority. He could tell by her tone and the way she spoke. She had not asked him about the ranch. She had given him orders. By noon, he had finished most of the chores and was sitting on the porch with a glass of cold water. He looked over the fields, enjoying the sight of sunlight dancing across the grass. That was when he saw the same woman again, walking quickly down the road, this time with another man by her side. The man wore a neatly pressed shirt and carried a folder. Together, they headed straight toward his property. He set his glass down and stood, Ready to meet them. Afternoon, he said warmly as they reached the porch steps. The woman didn't waste time with greetings. She gestured to the man beside her. This is Tom, he's on the HOA board with me. We need to discuss the violations on your property. The ranch owner raised an eyebrow. Violations? Tom cleared his throat and opened the folder. Inside were printed sheets of paper. According to HOA standards, all barns and exterior buildings must be painted in neutral colors approved by the board. Red is not an approved color. Additionally, livestock such as horses, cattle, or goats are not permitted within community limits. We'll need you to remove the animals within 30 days. The ranch owner listened silently, his hands resting calmly at his sides. When Tom finished reading, he gave a small nod. I see, but you might be overlooking something. This ranch has been here for generations. My property line is separate from your community. My land is not under your HOA's control. The woman's eyes flashed. That's not true. Everyone in this area is under Oakwood Meadows HOA. If you live here, you follow our rules. Simple as that. He smiled faintly, not with mockery, but with patience. Ma'am, I respect that you have rules for your neighborhood. But this ranch is not in your neighborhood. It was established long before Oakwood Meadows existed. Your documents don't cover my land. You're welcome to double-check the county maps if you'd like. Tom shifted uncomfortably. He had not expected such a firm yet calm answer. The woman, however, grew sharper. She stepped closer, her clipboard clutched tightly. I don't care how long you've been here. This community will not tolerate noncompliance. If you refuse to follow the rules, we'll escalate. The man remained steady. You may do what you think is right. But I'll continue caring for my ranch, my animals, and my home. This land is not under your authority. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The horses in the pasture swished their tails and went on grazing, as if the argument meant nothing to them. Finally, Tom closed his folder. Perhaps we should review the boundaries before making any final decisions, he said carefully, trying to soften the situation. But the woman snapped back. There's nothing to review. He's breaking the rules and he thinks he can get away with it. She turned on her heel, muttering as she stormed back down the driveway. Tom followed, looking uneasy. The man stayed on his porch watching them leave. He didn't feel anger. He didn't even feel surprise. People like her existed everywhere. People who believed control gave them power. But he knew the truth. His land was protected, his deeds were clear, and the law was on his side. That night he sat in the farmhouse writing in a small leather journal his father had once kept. He wrote about the encounter, not out of worry but to keep record. Day 2, he wrote. And already the HOA believes they can claim the ranch. They don't realize history runs deeper than their rules. Over the next few days, he noticed the woman passing by more often. She would slow down near the ranch, scribble something in her notebook, and continue on. Sometimes she stood at the edge of the property, just staring at the barn or the horses. Neighbors from the new houses began to notice too. Some of them waved kindly at him when he drove past. Others seemed uncertain, whispering to one another when he walked into the small grocery store in town. It was clear the woman had been talking. One afternoon, while he was repairing a gate, a couple from the new neighborhood stopped by. They introduced themselves kindly and offered a pie as a welcome. As they chatted, the husband lowered his voice. Word of advice, watch out for her. She's been president of the HOA since it started, and she thinks she runs everything. Most of us just stay out of her way. The ranch owner thanked them sincerely. Their kindness reminded him that not everyone around here carried the same attitude. Many were simply families looking for a quiet place to live, but he also knew the situation was heating up. 2 days later, as he was bringing hay to the barn, he heard the sound of a car pulling up fast. He turned and saw the woman again, this time with flashing frustration on her face. She got out of her car and pointed at him. That barn is still red, she said loudly. And those horses are still here. This is your final warning. If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities. The man placed the hay down slowly and wiped his hands. He met her gaze with steady calm. You may do what you believe is necessary. But I've already explained, the HOA does not control this land. She opened her mouth to argue again, but something about his tone made her stop. There was no fear, no hesitation, just certainty. She glared at him for a long moment, then got back in her car and sped away. As the dust settled on the road behind her, the man returned to his work. The sun dipped lower in the sky and golden light spread across the fields. He thought about the path ahead. She had threatened to call the authorities, and he knew she would follow through. But he also knew something she didn't. When the authorities came, they would find the truth on his side, and when that truth came to light, the balance of power would shift completely. The ranch was quiet again. The horses nickered softly. The wind rustled through the grass, and the man felt no fear for tomorrow. Trouble might be coming, but he was ready. The days following the police visit passed with a strange calm. The ranch seemed untouched by the world beyond its fences, yet tension lingered in the air. The HOA president had not returned personally, but her presence was felt in letters, whispered complaints from neighbors, and the occasional vehicle slowly passing by, as if she were always watching. The man spent his mornings tending the horses, repairing fences, and clearing the fields. Each task grounded him, allowing him to focus on what mattered most, the land he loved and the quiet life he desired. He noticed how the sun painted the barn in golden light at dawn, how the dew shimmered across the grass, and how the wind carried distant bird songs from the hills beyond the property. This was peace, and it reminded him why he had returned after so many years. But the tension with the HOA was far from over. One afternoon, a meeting was called in the new community clubhouse. He received the invitation anonymously, slipped under the farmhouse door. The note was polite but firm. Community meeting, discussion on HOA compliance. Attendance required. At first, he considered ignoring it. The ranch wasn't part of the HOA after all. But curiosity and a sense of responsibility drew him in. Perhaps it was time to see firsthand what the community thought of the situation. The clubhouse was modest, with wooden floors and large windows letting in the afternoon sunlight. Families filled the seats, some chatting quietly, others whispering nervously. The atmosphere was a mix of curiosity and mild tension. At the front, the HOA president stood behind a small podium, clipboard in hand, clearly expecting to assert her authority once more. As the man entered, a hush fell over the room. Some faces held surprise, others held curiosity, and a few showed respect. The woman's eyes narrowed as she noticed him, her posture stiffening. She did not expect him to attend. She had imagined she would speak and be obeyed without challenge. The man approached the front slowly, nodding politely to a few residents he recognized. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the room to settle. When he finally addressed the group, his voice was calm and steady. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is..." He paused briefly, measuring his words. "I oversee policies for HOAs across the country. I'm here today not to assert power, but to clarify and resolve any misunderstandings about my property." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some people whispered to neighbors in disbelief. Others leaned forward, eyes wide. The woman at the podium froze, her grip on the clipboard tightening. She finally spoke, trying to regain control. I don't understand. Everyone must follow HOA rules. That's the way it works. How can you..." The man held up a hand gently. "Please allow me to explain. Oakwood Meadows has rules for the homes within its boundaries. I respect that, and I have no intention of interfering with your community. But my ranch predates your HOA. It exists outside your boundaries. I have property deeds and official records to show this. While your rules apply to your neighborhood, they do not apply to my land." He stepped aside, holding out a folder containing maps, legal papers, and historical documents. Residents leaned forward to glimpse the records. It was clear from the charts and maps that the ranch lay completely outside the HOA's limits. The woman stammered, trying to regain authority. But, you're part of the community. You live here now. How can you ignore the rules?" The man's expression remained calm, almost gentle. "I'm part of the broader area, yes, but my home and my land are separate. I am not ignoring the rules. I am simply following the correct ones. The law recognizes this distinction. I've done nothing wrong." A few residents began nodding quietly, realizing she had misrepresented the facts. Some whispered to one another, their tone shifting from curiosity to understanding. It became clear that the woman's frustration was not with him personally, but with the realization that her perceived authority had limits. The man continued, addressing the room with patience. "I have no desire to disrupt your community. I value peace, neighbors, and cooperation. I only ask that the same respect be extended to my property. Disputes and confrontations waste energy that could be better spent building understanding and friendship." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was quiet, the air thick with a mixture of astonishment and reflection. Finally, the HOA president spoke again, her voice low, almost defensive. "But on all my notices, all my warnings." The man shook his head slowly. "Notices cannot create authority where none exists. I have answered every concern respectfully, as you have seen. Further action on your part must recognize the facts and the law." At that moment, one elderly woman from the audience spoke up. "We had no idea. We were only hearing what we were told. Thank you for clarifying." She nodded respectfully, her tone sincere. A few others echoed her sentiment, murmuring agreement. The president's shoulders slumped. She realized that she had misjudged the situation, had underestimated the man's knowledge and patience. She had attempted to assert control over something she did not understand, and the room's reaction made it clear she had failed in her effort. The man added gently, "I hope this is a lesson for all of us. Not about power or authority, but about understanding and clarity. Misunderstandings can create conflict, but honesty and respect can resolve them. Let us work together peacefully." Some of the younger residents nodded, impressed by his calm approach. Others quietly whispered to one another, clearly reconsidering their previous assumptions. The tension in the room softened, replaced by curiosity and relief. The president finally turned and left the podium, muttering under her breath. Her aura of authority was gone, replaced with the recognition that she had been corrected in public. Some in the room avoided looking at her, others glanced at the man with newfound respect. After the meeting, several residents approached him personally. They asked questions about the property boundaries, about his role with HOAs, and about his vision for living in the area. He answered patiently, encouraging understanding and cooperation. It was clear that while a few remained loyal to the HOA president's view, many others were grateful for the clarity and relief his presence had provided. Walking back to the ranch in the fading sunlight, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The confrontation was not over, but the truth had been revealed. The land, his deeds, and the law were on his side. His patience had allowed the facts to speak louder than anger, louder than threats, louder than misunderstanding. At the barn, he paused to watch the horses graze. The wind carried the soft scent of wildflowers and freshly turned soil. The sky was streaked with gold and violet as the sun dipped below the hills. For the first time in many days, he allowed himself to feel completely at ease. The truth had been revealed. The misunderstanding had been addressed, and the community, though shaken, had begun to see him not as an enemy or a threat, but as a neighbor seeking peace and fairness. As night fell, the stars began to shine above the ranch. The air was calm, the animals quiet, and the world seemed as it should, steady and untroubled. He knew that further challenges might arise, but he also knew that with patience, truth, and respect, they could be met without conflict. The land had endured storms far greater than an angry HOA president. It had witnessed generations of families, changing times, and countless challenges, and it would endure long after the noise of a single dispute had faded. He leaned against the barn door, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, and whispered to himself, "This is my home. This is my land, and here peace will always return." The ranch, the horses, the barn, and the sprawling field stood as witnesses. The truth had been revealed, and now the work of understanding and coexistence could begin. After the truth had been revealed at the community meeting, life on the ranch returned to a quieter rhythm. The man awoke early each morning to the familiar sounds of birds singing and horses moving across the pastures. The soft light of dawn spilled over the rolling hills, touching the barn and farmhouse in golden hues. Everything seemed ordinary, yet beneath the calm, a new respect had settled in the community. For several days, the HOA president did not approach the ranch. She avoided driving past, and her letters stopped arriving. The man, however, paid little attention to her absence. He knew that peace was not something given by others. It was something one cultivated within oneself. Each morning, he repaired fences, tended the animals, and walked the fields, letting the steady work remind him why he had returned in the first place. Neighbors from the new community began to approach him differently. Some came to say hello when passing by on the road. Others stopped by the farmhouse with small gifts like fresh-baked bread or flowers. Children waved from bicycles and dogs barked happily when they saw him. The atmosphere had shifted. Where there had been whispers of complaint, Now there were greetings and nods of respect. One afternoon, while he was mending a section of fence near the pasture, a few neighbors came over to watch. They asked questions about the property lines, about the horses, and even about life on the ranch before the community had been built. He answered patiently, sharing stories of the land, the seasons, and the work required to maintain a ranch. His tone was gentle, his manner calm, and the neighbors listened intently. One woman holding a basket of apples asked quietly, "So you really oversee all these HOAs?" "That's incredible." He nodded, a small smile forming. "I provide guidance and oversight to HOAs across the country. But that doesn't mean I interfere in people's daily lives. I only want to ensure fairness and understanding. My home here is a place of peace, and I hope it can stay that way." The neighbors nodded, clearly reassured. They began to understand that the rumors they had heard about conflict with the HOA president were not the full story. The man wasn't there to fight. He was there to live honestly and quietly as he always had. Meanwhile, the HOA president remained distant. She occasionally drove past the ranch, her car moving slowly, but she did not stop. Her letters ceased, her complaints vanished, and the community seemed to sense that the confrontation had ended, not because of fear, but because the truth had been revealed. People began to respect boundaries, both legal and personal, and realized that misunderstanding authority could cause unnecessary tension. The man spent the evenings on the porch, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep indigo. The stars appeared one by one, their light reflected in the windows of the farmhouse and on the quiet fields. It was a time for reflection, a time to appreciate the life he had returned to. He remembered his grandfather often during these moments, thinking about the lessons learned over generations, that land endured, that patience mattered, and that peace was always worth seeking. One evening, a group of neighbors approached him with a simple request. "Would you join us for a community dinner?" One asked. "We'd like to get to know you better now that we understand." He smiled warmly. "I'd be happy to." The dinner was held outdoors with tables set near the edge of the pasture. Children ran and laughed. Adults shared stories, and the smell of home-cooked meals filled the air. For the first time, the man felt a sense of belonging, not as someone defending his property, but as a part of a larger, understanding community. The HOA president did not attend. Her absence was noticeable, but it no longer carried weight. The community had begun to form its own understanding, one based on clarity, respect, and truth rather than fear or authority. Over the next weeks, life on the ranch returned to its natural rhythm. The horses grazed freely, the barn stood proudly in its original color, and the fences remained strong and well-maintained. Each day brought new reminders of the land's resilience. The man often walked the fields alone, thinking about the challenges of the past weeks. He realized that confrontation was never the goal. The goal had always been understanding. Occasionally, neighbors would ask for advice about their own small disputes or questions about HOA rules. He shared his knowledge patiently, helping them navigate minor conflicts before they grew into larger problems. His presence became not one of fear or authority, but of guidance and wisdom. The ranch itself seemed to respond to this calm. The soil felt richer under his hands, the grass grew taller and greener, and even the weather seemed gentler. Sunsets were longer, winds more soothing, and the nights quieter. It was as if the land itself approved of the peaceful resolution. One morning he stood at the top of a small hill overlooking the fields. The sun rose slowly, painting everything in warm light. The horses nickered softly below. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The struggle with the HOA president, the tension with neighbors, and the letters and threats, they were all behind him now. Peace had returned, not because anyone had given it, but because truth, patience, and fairness had been allowed to guide the outcome. He thought about the lessons learned. First, patience was essential. People often acted out of misunderstanding or fear. By remaining calm and clear, one could allow truth to show itself without unnecessary conflict. Second, knowledge was power, but not in the way most people assumed. Knowing the rules, the law, and the facts allowed him to act with confidence and fairness. And finally, respect, both given and received, was the key to lasting peace. The man smiled to himself, thinking of the journey that had brought him here. He had returned to a place he loved, faced challenges he had not expected, and emerged with a deeper appreciation for the land, the community, and the simple joys of life. even the HOA president, though still present in the background of the community, no longer wielded the same power. Her attempts to assert authority had been met with calm and knowledge, and she had learned, quietly and perhaps reluctantly, that understanding and fairness mattered more than confrontation. In the weeks that followed, life continued on the ranch in its gentle, steady way. Each day the man tended to his fields, repaired his fences, and cared for his animals. Each evening he watched the sun set over the hills, reflecting on the lessons learned and the peace regained. Neighbors continued to visit, some seeking guidance, others simply sharing stories and laughter. The community had shifted from suspicion to understanding, from tension to respect, and the ranch, the barn, the animals, and the land itself remained a testament to patience, truth, and perseverance. As the seasons changed, the man realized that the struggle with the HOA president had been more than a dispute over property. It had been a test of character, of patience, and of resolve. And through it all he had learned that peace was not found in avoiding challenges, but in facing them with calm, fairness, and clarity. One crisp autumn evening he stood once more on the porch, the wind rustling the golden leaves around him. The horses grazed quietly below and the farmhouse stood proudly behind him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. Life was simple, steady, and good. He knew that challenges might arise again someday. People would continue to act out of misunderstanding or habit, but he also knew that with patience, knowledge, and respect, any situation could be met with clarity and calm. The ranch was safe, the community was learning, and peace had returned, not as a gift, but as a reward for truth and persistence. As night fell, stars filled the sky, reflecting in the quiet fields. He sat on the porch swing, gently rocking back and forth, and allowed himself to feel fully at ease. The barn, the horses, the fences, and the land itself stood as reminders of resilience and the power of calm determination. And in that moment, he realized that the lesson of the past weeks would stay with him forever. That understanding, fairness, and patience could turn conflict into respect, tension into cooperation, and challenge into peace.